Hi, welcome to our second lesson in our series on finding yourself in chaotic times. If you remember in the first one, we really focused on kind of defining mindfulness, what it is, paying attention on purpose in the present moment without judgment, and then finding some sense of calming our messy mind, so counting our breath. This week, we're going to look at trying to take a step back from our mental bombardment of thoughts, and we'll get into that. But I want to give kind of first a sense of some of the structure of the overall lesson. So each week we're looking at some of the context, some of the teaching behind it, and we're also going to explore, some particular seated meditation practice. But you may have noticed we also had last week a kind of on-the-spot meditation that we did about who are you, what is there, what is your experience like when there's no problem to solve. So that was a meditation I took from a guy named Locke Kelly. Sorry I didn't attribute it to you the first time, but what we're wanting is to have practices not only that we can schedule and do regularly, but ones that we can carry with us throughout the day. And we're actually going to begin this week with one of these on-the-spot practices, a way to, when you don't have 10 minutes, but maybe have 2-3 minutes, can still connect to this deeper, wider sense of your experience. So what we're going to look at is an actual 3-minute meditation practice. I take it from the mindfulness-based meditation series in cognitive therapy around depression, but it's one that I found is really helpful for a lot of different contexts. You can think of the meditation like an hourglass that takes the broad experience, focuses it down onto your actual breath, and then broadens out. I like the analogy of a water filter, that you take everything that's going on and you just recognize what it is, and then you filter it through this experience with your breath. And then from there, you have your experience, but it's been a little bit distilled, a little bit purified. All this extra that you were adding has been kind of taken out. So it's a 3-minute, you do each step for 1 minute. I'll actually guide us through it, but again, you're going to recognize your thoughts, feelings, everything that's going on, focus in on your breath that filters out that experience, and then kind of return to your broader experience. So if you want, you can go ahead, however you are, if you're sitting down, if you're walking, go ahead and take a couple of deep breaths. And then I just want to let us begin, okay? So I want you just to recognize all the thoughts that you have. And then turn your attention to whatever feelings might be present, whatever emotions. And then notice whatever sensations are in your body. Now I want you to turn your attention to your breath, focusing in on the experience, maybe at your belly or at your nose of the breath going in and out, and resting your attention just solidly on your breath. And then move from your breath to that whole body awareness, being present fully to your embodied experience. And whatever thoughts or feelings come, you can acknowledge them without trying to smash them down or latching on to them. And if your eyes were closed, you can open them. Kind of sometimes it helps move your shoulders a little, take a deeper breath, and kind of return to your ordinary experience. So this meditation is a great on-the-spot. You can do it, when you're waiting, when you just have a couple minutes, when you're feeling a lot of pressure, a lot of stress, feeling overwhelmed. You just kind of notice and observe what's happening, bring it to your breath, and then move to that wider sense of experience. So they actually developed this because of the ways they noticed our minds kind of get stuck on these cycles. Maybe we're constantly thinking about the things that are stressing us out, the things that are worrying us, the things that make our lives hard. Or maybe we just have this feeling, this sensation, right? This heaviness in our body that leads to this sadness, or this sense of tension and energy trapped in our muscles. And so this mindfulness meditation was a way to kind of interrupt that cycle, where you can acknowledge what's going on in your experience without getting overwhelmed by it and wrapped up in it. And then you connect to your body, right? Because our body, these physical sensations, are connected to our feelings, which are connected to our thoughts. And this allows you then in that third step to kind of reconnect to your experience without all of those things being added to it. I can illustrate this with a story. I don't know who I read it from, so I can't attribute it to them. There's this story about this, guy who goes to a meditation retreat. He's meditating and he has this experience, notices some jaw pain. And then starts thinking through like, oh yeah, I do this. I clench my jaw. I do this when I'm stressed. Goes through all the things that makes him stressed, and then realizes, oh yeah, my dad also clenched his jaw. There's this, kind of family history and dynamic. And starts exploring, like, oh, that's so interesting how we receive these habits and continue them on our own, even when we're not aware of them. Builds this all up. Feels really excited at the end of the meditation that he has this new insight into some of his own history and patterns. And so then he was debriefing with his meditation teacher, and the instructor, says, so tell me about your experience in meditation, and, relays him all of it. Well, I started feeling this jaw pain, and it connected to these habits and this kind of chronic clenching, and I get it from my family, and lays out all these connections. Is really excited, looks to the teacher for that sense of affirmation of this great discovery, and the teacher looks and says, so there was an experience of some jaw pain. What else? And so in that moment, the teacher's trying to say, all right, there was this moment of experience, and then you elaborated it. You were, like, oh, I don't like this jaw pain. How do I get rid of it? Maybe if I get to the roots of it, I can undo it. And all of a sudden, you were disconnected from your moment-to-moment experience. And we all have this desire, right, to increase the good things, decrease the bad things, to get a sense of control over our experience. But in the mindfulness practice, we're trying to kind of step back from all of that, of getting to our experience with nothing added. You can think about this with another analogy of like a fire. You notice there's this fire. Could be this, anxiety, this sadness, this stress, whatever it is. We see this fire, and one response is, don't like the fire. Maybe I'll just cover it up with a bunch of stuff and it'll go away. So we just, lob what we find around, some old Amazon boxes and some clothes you don't wear and this chair you don't need. And you kind of build up a pile, repressing it, ignoring the fact that everything you put on top of it is also flammable. So looks like it's covered over, you don't see it, but eventually you have a much bigger fire. The other response that we often have that seems really counterintuitive is that we build the fire. We stoke it. We're like, oh no, there's this fire that's really bad. I don't want anyone to ignore it. I don't want to go into that repression mode, and I don't want people around me to think that everything's okay. So we really amplify it and build it up, and we start thinking, okay, there's, it's burning this kind of stuff. I have this sadness. You know what else makes me sad? This really makes me sad. Or this is another reason why I'm a terrible person, or this is another reason I need to be really scared about the future, about the uncertainty. Whatever it is, we start just adding to it, picking out all those things that feel related, and we're trying to say to ourselves and maybe those around us, like, this isn't okay. We can't pretend that everything's okay. We can't ignore it. We need to build this fire up so that it doesn't get ignored and overlooked, and before we know it again, we have this really wild, big fire. And so that's what in mindfulness we're trying to do. Neither repress it, nor identify and build into it and elaborate it, going through that list that we carry maybe in our minds about all of the things that are terrible or going terrible or people who are terrible or whatever it is that's kind of sets us off. And next week we'll look at an on-the-spot practice to do in the very moment that you're overwhelmed. But this week's kind of guided meditation practice, our daily routine, is about watching thoughts, about learning to kind of step back and acknowledge what's happening without latching on and getting really involved and invested in it. So this is kind of a basic standard meditation practice, and you just sit in your meditation posture. I find it helpful if you start with a few, maybe a minute of calming breaths, whether that's counting, labeling, just to get yourself present. And then you rest your attention gently on your breath. Often, kind of maybe at the point of the nose, noticing the breathing, the experience, and that's it. And then your mind inevitably wanders, and you get caught up and wrapped up in these thoughts, and you just gently label it thinking, and return to your breath. And so that's what the practice is. But it's a helpful process. I like to think of it as an analogy, to give one more for this particular one. It's like standing at a busy intersection, right? You're standing there and you're just supposed to watch cars, and you're looking like, all right, I'm just going to watch cars. A couple of cars go by, and then bam, before you know it, you're like 2 blocks down the road. Somehow you got into this car, it took you for a drive, and then you're like, oh wait, gotta get out of the car. So you're like thinking, or in this case, I'm in the car. So you step out, go back to the curb, and start watching cars go by. And you do this again and again and again through the time. And what you're actually doing, I think a lot of people get confused because they think the goal is to not have any thoughts, to not get into any cars. But actually the goal is to become familiar with waking up from them, of learning when you're wrapped up in whatever thought it was. So the goal isn't no thoughts, but becoming familiar with that process of gently labeling it thinking. Oh, here's another moment when I got really wrapped up in whatever mental story was going on, whether it's a visual one or a narrator talking, however it is that your mind wanders around and whatever it wanders to. The goal is just to become increasingly familiar with taking that step back to the curb. So not no cars, but learning to get out of the cars when you're stuck in them. And this helps us cultivate also a sense of gentleness with ourselves, because it's not a practice that is easy, right? We keep getting distracted. We want to have this long experience of calmness, and then we get wrapped up in whatever it is. And so we have to just gently return, returning to the breath in the moment. And then something that happens over time is you actually become familiar with what cars get you really excited that you latch on to. So you can start getting more specific. Instead of just saying thinking, you can think worrying or planning or whatever it is that becomes your default mode. I often start shifting from practicing to thinking about how I'm going to teach about practicing. So I'll say teaching, and then I realize that the teaching one is actually deeply about worrying. I want to do it well. I want to be well liked. I want to have something that matters to give to people. And so there's then this underlying worry. So you become familiar with the patterns in your own mind, kind of the cars that go by and the ones that really help you get wrapped up. And you learn again over time to get a little distance, to not think like, oh, whatever thought is coming through here is me. I can actually stand back from it. It's just a car, it's just a thought. Instead of getting wrapped up, oh, there's sadness, I feel this heaviness, I gotta now tell a story about why is it that I'm sad today? What are all the things? Let me list them. You just think, oh, there's sadness. Yeah, that's present. I don't need to smash it down, right? Which builds the fire. I don't need to stoke it up so it doesn't get ignored. I just recognize it. There it is. My friend's sadness. It's here again today. And over time, this allows everything that's happening in your emotions and your body to be present without you being so tightly connected to it, as if it was all of your experience or the totality of who you are. So that's the goal over the next week, is to spend 10 minutes a day, I think, is a helpful kind of beginning time frame. If you've been doing it for longer, you can do it for longer. If you can only do 7 minutes, do 7 minutes. But again, that daily practice, watching your thoughts and labeling it, thinking. So thank you very much, and I look forward to going on to lesson 3 next week.